Hello, and welcome to episode 25 of the Best Games Period. Once again, since you're hearing my voice, clearly Jack is not with us this week. Jack, get well, get all your work done. Maybe if you weren't such a slacker, then you wouldn't have to wait to the last minute. Just kidding. I know you're very busy. But anyway, Jack's not here, so it's me, Jeremy Brown, hanging with my buddy Daniel Jones. Daniel, say hi to the good people of the internet.
What's happening, people?
I didn't say all people, I said just the good people.
Oh, okay. What's happening, good people?
Yeah.
Bad people? Just go back to doing whatever bad things you were doing.
So last week, during our Tetris episode, we promised you guys an Uncharted episode this week, and we are going to deliver. We absolutely are. However, Daniel, we called an audible.
Yep, we like to call audibles. And this is partially because Jack's not able to come on the show this week. For the most part, it is because Jack's not able to come on the show, so blame him. But we're going to do an Uncharted 2 versus Uncharted 3 episode, and because we want Jack's dissenting opinion on both of those games, saying that neither of them are best games, period, we decided to just do an episode on the first Uncharted, which is worthy of discussion in its own right.
And full disclosure, there's no rule written or unwritten that says two games from the same series cannot be a best games, period. So,
no.
Just throwing that out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, if we had done Portal and Portal 2 separately, I think they both would have been best games, period. Right?
For shizzle, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're fortunate enough to be able to talk about 2007's Naughty Dog first PlayStation 3 game, Drake's Fortune, Uncharted, this week.
Uncharted Drake's Fortune. But before we do that, why are we talking about Uncharted Drake's Fortune? Why are we talking about Uncharted, Jeremy? I think everybody knows why.
Because it came up on the list. Also, I think there might have been a game released this week that has something to do with it. I think it was a Tomb Raider game. I'm not sure.
Oh, right. Tomb Raider. Yeah, Rise of the Tomb. No.
Tomb Raider Go?
No. Lara Croft Go?
Dude Raider.
Oh, Uncharted, that iOS game. That iOS Uncharted came out this week.
Uncharted Fortune Hunter. Yeah.
Fortune Hunter, right, because, that's exactly what you want
let's
from
put
Uncharted.
a thieves' end to this madness and just admit Uncharted 4 came out, and we've both been playing it, and
that was good.
We decided last week that would probably be a good discussion, although different games, for this week, so that's what we're doing.
But have you been playing Uncharted 4, Jeremy?
I have. I'm somewhere halfway through Chapter 9.
So before we get into it, we're going to maybe talk generalities about the game. We're not going to spoil specific plot points or anything like that. We might talk about certain moments in vague wording. But if you don't have to worry about us spoiling Uncharted 4.
Yeah, because we haven't finished it anyway.
Yeah. I'm on chapter 15. Sully turned into a dragon. It was really weird, but, mystical stuff always happens in these Uncharted games. Oh, right, spoilers. And you're on chapter 9?
Yeah, I think I'm about halfway through chapter 9.
So, what do you think of it so far?
To be honest, it hasn't fully grabbed me as much as the other Uncharted games did initially. But I love it. I mean, that's like saying, I don't know, it's like saying something clever. It somewhat feels like it's a much longer break-in and I would almost say tutorial to the game than in the past. And, there's great moments. There's a moment pretty early on in the game when you're just chilling at your house with your wife. And I loved that part. I wish it could have lasted longer, but it had to end.
Yeah. If you haven't heard what that part is yet, you must not go on the internet. But it's a great scene.
Yeah.
I really liked it. I've heard some people say that it feels forced, but I didn't think so. I told you before you started playing that those first few hours kind of felt like a lot like Last of Us Left Behind. Do you see what I was talking about now, though?
I do, except I loved Last of Us Left Behind the first few hours, but I get what you're saying. And it's not like I don't love this game. It's just not that immediate jump right into action,
Yeah.
The opening sequence is like that for a few minutes, but then it kind of calms down, and I firmly believe it's going to be necessary to the entire game overall, and story and whatnot, because you kind of have to understand that this is hard to talk about without spoiling. I mean, you just kind of have to understand Drake's mindset going into the part where you finally get into some more Uncharted type action. So I get that.
Well, I mean, it's not a spoiler to say that a big character in this game is Nate's brother. He's played by Troy Baker, and they spend a lot of the first 4 or 5 hours really kind of setting up their relationship and their backstory. They go in detail on both characters' backstories, which I appreciate.
Yeah.
I think I've talked about this before on the show, but I appreciate when games take their time to set up the characters, knowing that it's going to be kind of a long adventure. It's not a movie. You can't pace a video game like a movie because eventually you're going to run out of story to tell. And if you pace it more like a novel, where you take your time to set up the characters and set up the conflict and set up everybody's motivations, including the villains, who I think are a lot more compelling this time around, specifically Rafe.
Yeah.
You get a better sense as a player of what's going on, and you feel more invested. And that's starting to pay off for me where I am now in the game. I'm really interested in the plot, both for the characters and the mystery itself of Henry Avery's treasure.
Yeah.
So I'm really enjoying it, but it doesn't really kick in until about the end of chapter 9, which you haven't gotten to yet. So
I'll get there. And
yeah.
I'm still obviously enjoying it. It's just classic Uncharted, where there's exploring, there's platforming that's frustrating but also fun at times. There's some new platforming elements that haven't been in previous games. And that setup with his brother is important, even though it does take a while. It's not like, and no disrespect to Chloe or Cutter or Jeff the cameraman or any other character that's been in the games before. I mean, it's his brother. It's a big part of his past, and so I'm glad they're taking the time to do that right. And I'm not necessarily saying I just want to get into the kill everything mode.
I will say there's like I was telling you before the show, like I felt like the previous games used the set piece moments to really compel you to keep playing because you want to see what happens next and what crazy situations Nate gets himself into. Especially 2 and 3. We'll get into 1 on this show, which I think has a severe lack of compelling set piece moments. But 2 and 3, like, those were used to make you want to keep going on this roller coaster ride. And this doesn't have that. There's one specific set piece moment that really stands out, and if you've seen the E3 demo, you know which one I'm talking about. So far, there's some other stuff that I'm expecting that I've heard about, but I don't know what, if they're going to compare to the train sequence or the cruise ship or the plane or whatever from 3. Like, that's not really what's compelling me to keep playing. I'm personally just really invested in the mystery of this pirate treasure.
Captain Avery.
Yeah.
See,
it's like to the point that last night I got done playing for about 3.5 hours. It was 1:30 in the morning, and I decided to Google Henry Avery and learn all about him. So that's I've never done that on an Uncharted game before, and I was so interested in that story that I did that.
The researchers at Naughty Dog have always deserved more creds than they get, but I'm sure they've done a great job in this one as well.
I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's not accurate at all, but it's still really interesting.
So you mentioned Uncharted 2 and 3 have those great set-piece moments, but Uncharted 1 not so much. See, that never bothered me in Uncharted 1. And I don't know why. I think it was the story and the intrigue behind Sir Francis Drake and El Dorado and whatnot that kind of kept me going there.
Right.
So, yeah.
That's interesting.
Should we just segue into Uncharted 1? You want to talk more about 4, or...
We might as well just transition, because I don't think there's much more we can really say about 4 without spoiling it.
True.
Yeah.
It's a good game. You should play it. I'll say that.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, I think you're right. It's hard to put myself back in my shoes in 2000. I think it was 2008 when I actually played Uncharted, and to, like, go back and think about how it felt to play that game for the first time, because I haven't actually been able to play through it all the way through. I think since that first time. I think it's the only one in the series, including Golden Abyss, that I've only played once. So I don't remember what really kept me going, but I think you're right. Like, I remember being very interested in the story of Francis Drake and El Dorado and all of that.
I also think that it was a technological marvel, so to speak, on PlayStation 3. Which, it was beautiful, it was gorgeous, the story was great, the voice acting was great, the character acting was great. I think a combination of all of that made it feel like more than just a walking simulator. It felt like a real game, and I thought it was paced pretty well, even without those set-piece moments.
No, I think you're right. It absolutely was. Like, you and I played a little bit when I was here. When you were here.
When you were there? Yes.
Yeah, when I was at my house. No, when you were at my house, and we got to the sub. Like, there's certain moments in that game that have really stuck with me that I always remember when I think about Uncharted.
Yeah.
We
talked about that moment at the sub where you find the dead captain, and we were both like, man, that scared me shitless the first time that happened. Right?
Yeah. Exactly. Like, you remember those moments, and even just the moment where you're running towards the camera and the platforms are all falling behind you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's so Crash Bandicoot, but it's really done well. But even later in the game, like, I remember, maybe not for the right reasons, but I remember the jet ski section.
Yeah.
And hating that section. But I also remember when Elena takes control of the jet ski and you get to just shoot the rockets and you don't have to actually steer it anymore. That was a lot better.
But wait, couldn't you switch that out at any point?
Could you?
I think so.
Well, maybe I've just been playing this game the wrong way the whole time.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure at any point during maybe not all the jet ski scenes.
I thought the first time you have the jet ski, you have to steer it.
That might be accurate.
And also aim at the same time. And then later she takes control.
Well, no, see, you can switch to where it just, I guess, Nate auto steers and you can play as Elena and she shoots.
What?
Yes.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Not that the jet ski
maybe I just don't
areas
remember that.
were any better, were way better because of that, but yeah, you could.
Oh, alright. I guess I just don't remember.
She had like her Beretta and a grenade launcher, if I remember right. Yeah.
But then there's also
or an RPG, I mean.
The Jeep.
Yeah.
The Jeep chase was cool. But that's a very standard. Like, I've been trying to rack my brain and remember some of the set piece moments from Uncharted 1. Cause,
well, why don't you just take a minute and explain the story to everybody?
Okay.
And that might jar your memory.
That's a good idea. So the story is, if you haven't played Uncharted, Drake's Fortune, the story follows Nathan Drake, obviously, and he has this reporter following him around, named Elena Fisher, and he has this partner, Victor goddamn Sullivan, and they are on the trail of Sir Francis Drake, and they find this journal in Drake's coffin, and then, which I found really interesting, that the game starts with Nate discovering this coffin of this legendary figure in history and just kind of being like, all right, well, it's empty, and there's this journal here, and it just wasn't much of a discovery, really. But
that's what he expected. It should also be noted that Nate thinks he is one of Sir Francis Drake's lost relatives, even though Drake never had children.
He thinks he is, and actually in the first game, they present it as fact.
Yeah.
Like,
it's still kind of
Yeah. I mean, Elena points out that he never had
children.
Kids, or somebody. No, maybe that was later in the series, actually, because...
No, I think, actually, I don't know. I think Victor pointed it out pretty early on.
Okay. somebody points it out, and he's like, well, that they know of. No, that's in Uncharted 3.
Is it?
That's in Uncharted 3 that Sully, when they first meet, he's like, Drake didn't have any heirs.
Okay. Yeah, but it was a flashback too.
And the young Nate goes, well, that we know of anyway.
But
so anyway.
They found that coffin. Nate was not surprised that it was empty.
No, he wasn't. And that leads them to this island, where they find this German U-boat on a cliff in a very weird spot for a German submarine to be, which is actually sort of historically accurate, because a lot of people say that's where Hitler went.
Well, there's been many.
Not historically accurate, but
potentially, I guess.
Based on theory, at least.
Yeah, I mean, being off the coast of a South American country is one thing, but being in the middle of the river of, like, the Amazon jungle is kind of...
That's strange.
Yeah.
So in there, he finds a dead German U-boat captain with this map, and the map brings him closer to the treasure, but...
The map, he finds the lost part of Drake's journal that wasn't in Drake's journal when he opened the coffin. And then he looks at these coordinates on the map, and the map gives him his next clue as to where he needs to go.
Right. It's typical Uncharted story.
Or just basic storytelling, really. I mean,
we said we weren't going to spoil Uncharted 4, but if you haven't played Uncharted 1, we are going to spoil it. You could still listen to the show. You'll still enjoy the game.
We're going to spoil Uncharted 1.
Yes, yeah, Uncharted 1.
That's just a given.
Yeah. They run into these bad guys who Sully knows and owes money to, and they threaten to shoot Nate, but instead of shooting Nate, they just shoot Sully. And Nate runs off and runs into Elena in the woods after evading these bad guys who are also after the same treasure, because they basically found out that Sully was onto something and want him to pay them back by handing over this treasure.
So I'm thinking maybe I should take over telling the story at this point.
That's about where I am, where my memory starts to fade.
Okay, so back up a little bit. They ditch Elena.
Yes.
Because Sully, doesn't trust her. She's a reporter, and she knows too much now. Or they ditch Elena, and they get to this area in South America. Drake goes to explore the U-boat that's inexplicably perched on this cliff. And as he comes out, Sully is being basically apprehended by the bad guys that he owes money to. And they choose to shoot Sully over Drake. And you think Sully is dead. But for whatever reason, before Drake goes on the U-boat, he gives up Drake's journal to Sully. Which doesn't really make sense, because he kind of hoards all that stuff. But eventually you find out that these people, Eddie Raja and the guy that he's working for. Navarro. No. Yeah, Navarro. Isn't it?
Well, there's three bad guys. There's Eddie, there's Navarro, and then there's the guy in the suit.
Yeah, the guy in the suit, the rich one.
Yeah. I can't remember his name.
Gabriel Roman.
Roman, yep. There we go.
So he thinks Sully's dead, and he kind of is pretty hurt at this point, and he goes wandering off, and he ends up getting surrounded by some bad guys, and Elena shows up. She's a, reporter after all. She's kind of figured out what they were doing. So that's when they team up and end up fighting their way through all these things and find a whole bunch of clues to what El Dorado really is. As they start to get there, he sees all of Roman's people, including Navarro and Raja, there, and he thinks Sully double-crossed him. But what really happened was when they shot Sully, it hit Drake's journal and saved his life, and Sully had no choice but to give up the information. And eventually he teams back up with those two, and then zombies.
Right. And then zombies. So, Eddie claims that the island is cursed, and Roman doesn't really believe him, and so the zombies come out, and it turns out that, Francis Drake knew about the zombies, and knew the island was cursed, and he wanted to keep the artifact of El Dorado on the island, and Nate finds him dead, finds Francis Drake's corpse.
Because the conquistadors also found it, and they just overran Drake and his men, and they drug it out anyway. So, and when they did that, they unleashed this, I guess, airborne virus, because towards the end of the game, it's released intentionally. But it apparently only affects people in that one area. So
Yeah.
So that's pretty much the story to Uncharted 1.
Yeah, the story...
Naughty Dog tells it much better than either one of us. I will give them
yes, definitely. So it's hard to, like I said, it's hard to go back and think about how, at the time, how compelled I was to just keep playing this game and how riveted I was by the story. And I think so much of that is due to how well Naughty Dog does tell it and how the voice acting is, and at the time the graphics were fantastic. The cutscenes are well directed, and it feels like a Hollywood movie, and it still does, but it doesn't feel as polished as it felt back then. Going back to that game now, there's little things that they ironed out of the series that I never really considered to be a problem until going back to that game recently. Like, every time there's like a set piece moment, they kind of cut to like this letterbox format on the screen when, say, there's a giant scripted explosion, or like the scene where the truck falls off the cliff and lands right by Nate, so he can walk across these columns. Like, that scene where the truck falls is just a cut out of the gameplay where there's letterbox on the screen, and it's very jarring, where you don't have those kind of transitions in the other ones. And there's like this black between cutscene and gameplay. The screen goes to black because they couldn't figure out yet how to just smoothly transition from cutscene to gameplay, which they eventually figured it out on Uncharted 2. Like, there's just so many little things in this game, little flaws that they fixed later in the series. But man, at the time, I still loved Uncharted so much.
I mean, that's how it's supposed to go, though. They're supposed to fix those flaws over the course of a console generation. This game came out in 2007. It was developed in 2 years on a PlayStation 3, which is notorious for being extremely hard to develop for. From a company, and of course I'm a huge Naughty Dog fan, that was used to doing, Crash and Jack and things like that. So it was much different for them. So to pull that off in a couple of years was actually pretty impressive, if you ask me. And when we were at your house and we were playing it, even the HD collection or the remastered collection, whatever they called it, it was considerably not as impressive as it was when I played it 10 years before that. But that's to be expected.
Totally. And the way I look at it is, it's one of those kind of revolutionary games. I mean, I don't know how necessarily revolutionary it is, but it's just so well polished. I mean, other than those moments, it's just so, I guess, not well polished, but well presented. It tells its story so well.
I think it set a pretty high mark for development on the PlayStation 3 that other developers had to strive their best to live up to, and I think that was a good thing.
It definitely did, yeah. And it took risks and did interesting things that games were not doing at the time. It wasn't sci-fi, and it kind of mixed platforming with third-person shooting, which at the time, don't forget, like, third-person cover-based shooting was not...
Yeah, it was like Gears of War and nothing else.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot like that. Metal Gear Solid 4 had some, and that was in 2008. So I've said this before, like, I played I had Uncharted and Metal Gear Solid 4 at the same time. And I was playing Metal Gear Solid 4 and just was having a really hard time getting into it. So I took a break and started playing Uncharted and couldn't put it down. And after playing Uncharted and its 2-minute cutscenes that really just told the plot so effectively, but also in an entertaining way and in a kind of truncated way that Hideo Kojima would never really understand, I couldn't go back to Metal Gear Solid 4 after that because I just loved the presentation in Uncharted so much, and it felt like an action movie. It felt like a Hollywood action movie in interactive form, which is really interesting too because later we would have more than just Uncharted. There's also stuff like, you know, this is a weird comparison, but like David Cage games or even Until Dawn on the PS4, I think feels very inspired by Uncharted in the way it tells its story.
Sure.
So I just couldn't get enough of it at the time, but you know, I look back on it and there's so many things that the sequels do better. So when I'm trying to think about, like, is this one of the best games, period, my memory of this game is tainted by the fact that 2, 3, and now 4 are just leagues above it. So how does that, can it still be the best game, period? Like, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I think that's... I think we've somewhat had this discussion before on the show. I think that's kind of progression. That's natural. And I think that's okay. There's times where I've argued for the first game being the best, whether or not I thought it was the best. But as I said earlier, I don't think we have to choose between 1, 2, or 3. In my opinion, they can all be best games, period, if we want them individually to be. I mean, right? And 4.
Right.
But speaking specifically of Uncharted 1, I'll throw my cards down. Uncharted 2 is by far the best game in the series, but it doesn't mean the other ones are terrible at all. I think Uncharted 1 paved the way. It created a path for Naughty Dog to climb upon and do a better job on the next games. And they were much more familiar with the hardware. The hardware had updates and whatnot by that time that they could do more on. So I don't really want to be that guy that holds it in contempt because it was released 3 years earlier than Uncharted 2, so to speak.
I mean, okay. So I'm not, like, holding it in contempt. But
are you sure, sir?
It spoke out of turn. No, I don't know that I really would. Okay, so I will go back and play Gears of War 1, and still we'll have to talk about that series at some point on the show because I do consider that game to be one of the best games, period, and that series as a whole, the first 3 anyway.
That's because you're an Xbox fanboy.
No, actually, I'm not. So, but I think mainly that game holds up because the shooting is so freaking good. Yeah. And the core gameplay is so great. So the story in Uncharted holds up, but in a lot of ways, even in the remaster where they improved a few things here and there, but in a lot of ways, the gameplay in Uncharted 1 does not hold up.
Sure.
So I think, like, to me, it's hard to say that just the great story is enough to really keep that game up there. So I'm I'm having this conversation not to be a devil's advocate.
Sure.
I'm having this to legitimately ask questions about how important is story presentation and Uncharted's kind of legacy of setting that highest standard for the presentation of a story in an action game, compared to just being a really fun game to play when it comes down to deciding the best games period. Because I don't know. I'm going back and forth in my head, because part of me wants to say, no, this isn't, but Uncharted 2 is, you know?
So Uncharted 1 to me has a huge nostalgia factor. I feel like I say this over and over and over again on the show, but 2007 was around the time I got into gaming again, or really for the first real time.
Yep.
So, that game was amazing. I had played the Tomb Raider game that came out before that, and I don't think it ever came out on PlayStation 3 necessarily, but I played it on Vita. Not Vita. The PSP. Yes. And I loved it. I love that idea of, I'm a history nerd, duh. I love exploring. I suck at shooting games, so a game where you don't have to be great at shooting and can still progress and get through it is great. I love wit. I love puns, so Nathan Drake is right up my alley. Like you said, there wasn't a lot of set-piece moments that you can explain, but to me, just the entire landscape, the whole concept of the game was kind of a set-piece moment. The needing to be able to jump around and do this, that, and the other to get from one place to the other, and you'd have this moment of just pure exploration and finding treasures, which actually meant something in the first game because they did unlock things where they haven't so much in later Uncharted games, was cool. And it was something I had not really experienced before, so it was great. It was amazing. So to me, I definitely think it's the best games period. From a purely technical gameplay standpoint, no. I can see the argument why people would say otherwise, but I'm not going to choose between it or 2 as being a best games period. I think they both can be.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but in the same way that at the time when I played Eco, I really enjoyed it and I had a blast with it. But when I go back and play Eco, I don't really love it. So that's why I never recommend, that's why I was against Eco being a best games period. And so at the same time, I feel like it would be hypocritical of me to say that Uncharted 1 is a best games period when I don't really enjoy going back and playing that game.
So, here's the difference to me though. Eco came out pretty late in the Uncharted 2, or in the PlayStation 2 lifespan, where I've said many times, is the game playable? Is it accessible? Is it fun? And how important is it to gaming history? Or whatever. And I think when you compare Eco to
Uncharted Eco
1,
came out early in the PlayStation 2.
What year did it come out?
2001.
Oh, well, shut my mouth. Never mind then. Yeah, I don't know. I'm a fanboy, I guess.
No, so am I. I think we're about equal in our fanboyism for the Uncharted series. I don't know many people that actually enjoyed Golden Abyss, and I think we both did.
Both did, yeah. I don't. So, and the other thing is, Uncharted does tell a story all the way through. Where there's other games where it's not. I wish I could think of an example because I've done this on the show. There's other games where you don't have to play the first one to fully enjoy the experience of the second one.
Right.
And I think in a lot of regards, to feel that bond with Sully and Elena, you kind of have to play the first one.
That's one thing I was thinking about when thinking about Uncharted, is that those 3 core characters get, especially, specifically I'm talking about Sully and Elena as the supporting characters to Nate. They get the most screen time and the most development out of any of the other 2 of the original trilogy. They get the most development and screen time in the first game by far.
Oh, sure.
Sully is MIA through much of both Uncharted 3 and 2 and 3.
Mm-hmm.
But
you
3
love him dear and near, regardless of whether he's there or not, right?
Right, and that's because of the development they did on Uncharted 1.
And so far, you're much further into the game than I am. Elena's not so far a huge character in Uncharted 4, but
not at all.
It wouldn't be the same without her, even just making an appearance.
Right. Well, she drives the plot in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So, I don't know.
She drives the intrigue, anyway, in the plot.
Just like she drives the Jeep in Uncharted 1.
Yeah, so those two characters, and Elena's in half of Uncharted 2, and then she's in half of Uncharted 3. But they're both in all of Uncharted 1, and fans of the series really fell in love with those characters. So you have to give credit to that game for that.
Yeah, I know, I did. Particularly Elena and Sullivan. Especially Sully, I was so pissed when I thought he'd betrayed me, and then when I found out he didn't, and, all those things.
Yeah.
It was, I got the feels.
Yeah, definitely. Before we really go into, whether we think this, well, we already have, but before we, decide whether we think this is one of the best games, period, I want to talk about just, the history of this game and where Naughty Dog was when they started developing for it, and decided to go in a completely different direction. Because before Uncharted came out, they had done Crash Bandicoot. So they made the 3 on the PlayStation and Crash Team Racing. And then they made Jak and Daxter 1, 2, and 3 on PlayStation 2. And then Jak Racing X or whatever. And then they decided to move on to something else. And we didn't know what we were going to get from Naughty Dog. And at that point, Naughty Dog wasn't necessarily a premier developer. I remember loving Naughty Dog all the way back to the, Crash Bandicoot days. And I specifically remember so I am a bit of a Naughty Dog fanboy. I specifically have a memory of getting this, disc in, I think it was Official PlayStation Magazine. And it was a,
like a demo disc?
Yeah, it was a demo disc.
Those
and
things were cool.
This was before the internet, really. It wasn't before the internet, but it was before YouTube. So on that demo disc, they had this, kind of making of featurette. It was 15 minutes on Jak and Daxter. And it absolutely sold me on Jak and Daxter. That game, at the time, that game was beautiful. There was nothing that looked as good as the first Jak and Daxter when Jak and Daxter came out. And I still consider that one of the best 3D platformers of all time, so sue me. We'll get into Jak and Daxter at some point on this show, because it is one of the best games, period. But anyway, I fell in love with that first game, that first Jak and Daxter, and then didn't really love the 2 and 3. But they had kind of, with Jak and Daxter, they had started to move in this more mature direction, and the Jak series got more and more mature as it went on. It was weird. It was almost like the same kind of transition that the Prince of Persia series went through in that generation. And that was all because of Grand Theft Auto's influence. So when the PlayStation 3 came around, all of a sudden it seemed like the trend was these developers that had previously done kind of more cartoony games, platformers, kid-friendly games, family-friendly games, because that's where it was at. That's where the money was at before the PlayStation 2 came out. All of a sudden, a lot of developers were making more mature, adult-oriented games. It was as though they were aging with their audience. And I think they knew that, suddenly these kids that were playing Crash Bandicoot are probably now in college, and they want to play something other than a platformer. So let's give them something. And, you had Sucker Punch going from Sly Cooper to Infamous. And you also had, for instance, Naughty Dog going from Jak and Daxter to Uncharted. And I remember seeing
Insomniac going from Ratchet and Clank to Resistance.
Yeah, and exactly. Insomniac doing a complete just leap.
Yeah.
And there's other examples.
They still developed some Ratchet games on PS3.
Yeah.
But their first game was Resistance.
Yep. So with the new power of the PlayStation 3, Naughty Dog inspired, and they've said that they were inspired by the same kind of games that Gears of War was inspired by. I truly believe that Uncharted would have pioneered third-person shooting, or at least, I don't know, there were some other games that did third-person cover shooting before Uncharted, but after Gears of War. But around that time...
Well, before Gears, Siphon Filter did it, but...
No, it didn't.
Yeah, it did.
Not cover shooting. Like third-person shooting. The Siphon Filter didn't have the cover mechanics.
Not specifically.
Winback is a game that was on the N64 and on the PlayStation 2 that really kind of pioneered cover-based shooting. And there was another one, Killswitch, I think, is what it's called. I can't remember. I think that's what it's called. That did that as well. But those games ultimately weren't very good games. But I've heard that Naughty Dog was inspired by those when looking at where to go with their next franchise. And Gears came out, and especially with the ubiquity of Unreal Engine, which was a very bland, kind of dull colors kind of engine, suddenly, like, a lot of games just were not colorful. And then Naughty Dog comes out with this demo at E3 for this weird game with a lot of color, and like this guy jumping around in jeans in this colorful jungle environment, deep blues and vibrant greens. And it looked really interesting from like a visual perspective, but I remember the reaction at the time to Uncharted was, like, a lot of people called it Dude Raider because it just looked generic. It looked like a Tomb Raider knockoff with a generic white guy protagonist. So the fact that Uncharted came out and completely just blew past those first impressions that people had of it is really impressive. And that's mostly thanks to their excellent writing and presentation.
I would agree. It got to the point where the last couple of Tomb Raider games that came out were being compared to Uncharted. I mean,
yeah.
Like, seriously. How does that happen?
I don't know, but I love it because there's competition. As big of a fan as I am of Uncharted, I really enjoyed the Tomb Raider reboot, and I can't wait till Rise of the Tomb Raider is on PS4 so I can play it.
Same. You can enjoy both. It's okay.
Yeah.
So, do you want to talk about the influence that Indiana Jones probably had on it, or not?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I mean,
well, because I think it's really interesting that they found a way to kind of replicate the Indiana Jones style and the wit and everything. Like, Indiana Jones, those are really funny movies. And Uncharted that's a funny series of games. Like, the Oscars might even put it in the comedy category rather than best drama.
I mean, like, you have to have some level of intelligence to understand all the comedy, but it's there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what do you think of the...
Well, I think you and Jack know the Indiana Jones franchises much better than I do. But I could definitely see the influence, basically the treasure hunting, the crazy escape things, the meeting the Aboriginal folks or the whatever of the area you're in, and then just these weird mercenary guys that show up for whatever reason that you got to fight off to get to your destination. I think those are all influences that could have came from many places, but I do think Indiana Jones was definitely, at the top.
I think there's so many ways that Indiana Jones influenced that series. For starters, I already mentioned the wit in the script, but also the fact that at the end of every game in that series so far, there's some sort of weird, except Golden Abyss. That's one of the things that I really liked about Golden Abyss. It didn't have a weird MacGuffin or a crazy ending. But anyway, there's always some mystical, magical, weird thing that happens at the end of every game. Just like in Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
Like, they open the Lost Ark, and just these, like, spirits and ghosts just start coming out and killing people. And then Temple of Doom, they rip the guy's heart out and all that stuff. And it's still beating. Like, it's all crazy weird.
Yeah.
And then in Last Crusade, when the guy drinks the wrong amulet and his face melts. Side note, I watched the Indiana Jones movies when I was a kid. Except for Temple of Doom, my dad was not a fan of that one, so I didn't really see that until I was a teenager. But I was always freaked out by the ending scenes in those movies. But yeah, so the zombies in Uncharted Drake's Fortune, I think that's definitely a callback.
Yeah, especially when Navarro or Raja that opens up that cask intentionally to let out that airborne virus. Yeah.
Navarro.
It's kind of the same thing. And the other Uncharted games have very similar things. Like in the second one, there's the blue crystals. In the third one, there's the Flint, Michigan water. I mean, there's just there's things that... And I'm not those are some of my least favorite things about the games, to be honest with you. Are those things. But I don't... Like, it's not enough to make me like, these games suck.
But I think it's also interesting to note that they never overtly reference Indiana Jones or show that they're, like, they never steal from Indiana Jones directly. There's certain things, like, I think the motorcycle scene in Uncharted 4, one of the better set-piece moments in that game, like, there's some stuff in there that you're like, oh, okay, this is a lot like Indiana Jones. But for the most part, they don't really... And there's even an Indiana Jones reference in Uncharted 4 in the Scotland section. Did you catch it by any chance?
No, but again, I'm not a huge Indiana Jones. I mean, I've watched them all, but...
It's alright. So, there's a little reference. I won't spoil it. We're kind of meandering. How do you feel about Uncharted Drake's Fortune in the grand pantheon of best games, period?
Oh, man. See, this is why I just want to do a 2 versus 3 episode. It would have been so much easier for me. I guess, I have to call it a best games, period, for a lot of reasons. One, the nostalgia personally to me. 2, I don't think that you can... If you enjoy 2 and 3, I don't think you can enjoy them as much without having played it. 3, it's now part of the Uncharted collection. It's pretty accessible. It's on PlayStation Now. 3, 4, all kinds of platforms. 4, it was pretty historically important and relevant to the PlayStation 3. Not just that game itself, but the rest of the development and standard it set up for that platform. What am I on, 5? Because I just love the game. So yes, it is a best games period to me.
Okay. All right. I
Yourself?
think I don't know. So let me talk this out. So I still have fond memories of playing that game. So I do have the nostalgia for it. But I also hate the melee combat. I hate the way that it transitions, oftentimes taking away your control during really important set piece moments, rather than in 2 and 3 and 4 where you really have a lot of control during those moments. It takes away the effectiveness of them when you can't control them, when it is just a cutscene.
Sure.
Such as, I'm so smart. The moment in the plane when Nate and Elena have to jump out of the exploding plane. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would have loved for all of that to be interactive. And I think later in the series they would have made that interactive.
Was that a development downfall, or was that a hardware issue? We don't know.
I guess that's my next point, is that yes, I think a lot of the flaws with this game are simply because it was the first one on the PS3. They were working on new hardware that was notoriously hard to work on. Ask Bethesda. And they were doing things that really had never been done before. So there were a lot of unanswered questions that they had to answer. And,
they were kind of in uncharted territory.
They kind of were in uncharted territory, weren't they? So I have to give them a lot of slack for that, cut them a lot of slack for that. But at the same time, there's just so much that I didn't love about that game. While I'm railing against it, at the time the graphics were great at the time, but also some specific things in that game, effects, were terrible. Like the explosions. I mean, come on. They were just a tiny little orange mushroom cloud that lifted up in the sky after after you shot a barrel. They were terrible. They were even bad for the time. But that's neither here nor there. The water looked awful at the time,
what?
too.
The water was amazing.
Did.
Oh my god.
Water looked terrible.
No, at the time it was great. Now it looks like shite, but at the time it was great.
It still looked pretty bad. BioShock came along and there was beautiful water in BioShock. Whatever.
BioShock was just about water.
It's subjective. I just thought the water looked bad. But anyway,
you know what did
faces
suck?
looked bad. They were all waxy. But anyway, to move on to the positives, like we talked about.
Hold on, I want to say the one thing that sucked.
Okay,
the 6-axis controller sucked.
Yes, that too. The use of the 6-axis, which they cut out of the remaster, thankfully. But that was so awful. That was so bad, and they forced it on you much more than they ever needed to.
I can't count how many times I dropped grenades right at my own feet because of that damn thing.
Yes, I don't think I ever even used grenades because of that. And then walking across logs was awful.
Yeah.
It was just bad. So there's so much, at least in the original version, and I think that's one of the things is now you can go and play a much better version of that game. And like Jeremy said, it is a game that if you really want to understand those characters and appreciate them the way they're meant to be, you have to take that series as a whole, and that means including Uncharted Drake's Fortune. So for me, that is one of the best series of games ever.
Mm-hmm.
So that qualifies this as one of the best games, period.
Oh boy, I wasn't sure where you were going to land on that.
Yeah, I know, I wasn't either. I was
wondering if we were going to have a civil war with that type of situation going on. No, it's not even easy for me to say that because I get its flaws. I totally get its flaws. But sometimes, I'm not a perfect person, but I am one of the best people, period. Right?
In my opinion, for sure. Yep. Definitely. So, if you do not like the Uncharted series, I don't know why you listened to this episode, but if you do, and you have opinions about this game, let us know, because we want to hear them. You can talk to us on Twitter at bestgamesperiod. Jeremy is at mojomonkey12. Jack is at riverboatjack. May he rest in peace and rise again next week. And I am at IndieJones84. We put this show...
Do we even know what we're going to talk about next week?
No, I don't think we ever decided. So it'll be a surprise.
A mystery episode. Nice.
Yep. Mystery episode for next week, because we haven't talked to Jack about that. We put the show up every week on SoundCloud, iTunes, many other places. And you can find us on Extra Life. If you haven't signed up yet for Extra Life, and you don't know what Extra Life is, Jeremy, can you explain what Extra Life is? Because you guys do a much better job than I do.
Well, Extra Life is a charity that's based off gaming that contributes and supports the Children's Miracle Network of hospitals. In the past, traditionally, it's been a 24-hour marathon that happens once a year, and it's kind of like the March of Dimes marathon, where you get people to pledge to you and support you, and you play the games, and sick children get the money. Now it's pretty much a year-round thing. You can donate. I think you could have always donated any time, but now they have little events going on throughout the year. If you want to check it out, go to extra-life.org and just kind of see what it's about. You can donate money. You can start your own stream that generates money. You can start your own marathon that generates money. The important thing is you can make money for sick kids, and it's used for anything they need and their families while they're in the hospital or in recovery, so on and so forth. And you can actually pick where your money goes to as far as like local Children's Miracle Network hospitals. So it's not like it just goes to, Donald Trump or anything. It actually makes a difference. So check it out.
Right. And they have a big event every year in the fall where everybody can get together, and a lot of people get together in person, but also a lot of people just stream online all at the same time to play video games for 24 hours straight to raise money. But you can also raise money all year round. They obviously take donations for the Children's Miracle Network hospitals all year.
And the Children's Miracle Network is one of those charities that is highly reputable. It's not one of those ones where 90% go see administration and
yes
and whatnot. So it's a great cause.
Thank you, Jeremy.
You're welcome.
For joining me tonight to talk about Uncharted, because that's all we talked about. Unlike other shows, we didn't really talk about any other BS. But I will say, I miss Jack.
Yeah.
Yep. But next week, we have a mystery show for you. If you enjoy the show, subscribe to us on YouTube, iTunes, anywhere you want to listen to us. We're probably there. And let us know how you feel about Uncharted. Till next week, this is episode 25. And next week will be 26. I'm Daniel Jones. Thanks for listening. I'm getting increasingly bad at those. I don't know how.